episode of Rogue Refinery, the show where creativity reigns supreme as we attempt to dissect and optimize some of the coolest cards in Magic. I'm Ali Loney alongside Paul Cheon, and today we are checking out Song of Creation. Paul, tell us about this card.
Yeah, so Song of Creation is probably one of the most exciting cards here. It's one of those cards where you look at it and you're like, this has to be broken, right? This has to be a card that there has to be a deck that can just combo off of this, because anytime you cast a spell, draw 2 cards, right? So that just gets the creative juices flowing, and I'm really excited to see what some of these guys will bring, to kind of build around this card.
Yeah, I know when people saw this card spoiled, everyone was just like, oh my gosh, that's so busted. Because, like you say, in the right shell, it can really, really just do some crazy things.
Yeah, and when you look at this card, it's one of those things where it probably gets more powerful as you kind of delve deeper into the older formats, right? In Standard, you don't really have access to, a bigger card pool. You don't have access to as many cheap spells to be able to draw and keep that chain going. However, as you get, go into Pioneer and you go into Modern, all of a sudden there's more 0 mana casted cards, meaning, if you play something like a Song of Creation and a bunch of really cheap spells, all of a sudden you're going to have like 14 cards in your hand. So the real question is, what can you do with all those cards to clean out the game?
Yeah, there's got to be some sort of a payoff. You can't just sit there, drawing a bunch of cards and bidding a bunch of things. You have to do something to win the game eventually, besides bore your opponent to death. So, it's going to be cool to see what different win conditions we can find with this list.
Yeah, I mean, the one big thing, though, is the drawback. It is not insignificant, right? This is an extremely powerful card if you play it, but you can't just tap out and play this card, because if you do, well, guess what? You have no hand, right?
Yep.
At the end of your turn, you have to discard your entire hand. So you need to find a way to be able to play this card and then follow that up with enough spells to be able to actually close out the game, or, somehow find a way to bank additional spells or use your graveyard to find ways to keep that chain going. Because, if you somehow whiff, well, then you're just praying and hoping that you get to draw an actual action spell on the following turn, or you have nothing else left.
Yeah, that is definitely a downside. I mean, I've seen a few people, a few lists try and get around the fact that you have to discard your entire hand. Some decks using Riel, the Everwise, where every time you discard a card, you draw a card. Other decks using the Glinthorn Buccaneer, so every time you discard, you get to ping something. So, there's certainly a bunch of options in Standard, at least, but I'm sure there's plenty more in Pioneer and Modern.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, when this... I was still a part of play design when this card was kind of in our file. So the moment this kind of went into our FFL, we were like, oh my goodness, this is a card. And we definitely spent a lot of time trying to make sure that this is okay for Standard. And hopefully, we landed it at the perfect spot where it's a fun card, but hopefully it doesn't just completely take over Standard. But you know what? Standard is still pretty new. There's still a lot of time left. We'll see.
To kick things off, let's bring in Dan Shriver from the Faithless Brewing podcast to show us just how powerful Song of Creation can be in Standard. Welcome, Dan.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us today. So we gave you a pretty good challenge here, I'd say, to get Song of Creation to be as fun and maybe a little bit competitive in Standard. So what was the approach that you took when you saw this card?
I think you guys put it so well in your intro. I was definitely one of those people who, when this card was previewed, I was just jumping around on the streets like, I can't believe this. I get to draw 2 cards every time I play any spell. So I was just salivating. I couldn't wait to get my hands on this card and take it into some events and see how it could perform. So I took on Standard this week. And the part that really stood out to me about the card was the drawing as many cards as you want. I feel like once I have a Song of Creation in play, the sky's the limit. The only thing that's going to stop me is how much mana I have. It doesn't provide extra mana. So to me, it seemed like Song of Creation is telling me, hey, fill your deck with as much mana ramp and mana producers as you can, get this card into play, and then you're off to the races. So the first shell that I decided to try was just based around that very basic blue-green ramp concept. I started off with just the stalwarts of Standard, Arboreal Grazer, Growth Spiral, Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath, and Nissa, Who Shakes the World. Already, that's 16 cards that either add more lands into play or double my mana in the case of Nissa. Song of Creation also adds an additional land drop every turn, so we're talking about a deck that can just generate insane amounts of mana, and in theory, my hope was that once I got the Song in play, I would just start chaining off, making more land drops, casting more spells, putting more mana into play, and eventually draw my entire deck and win, hopefully with a Fastest Oracle at the end of the chain.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that at least for standard, one of the most important cards is trying to get that Nissa in play as quickly as possible, right? If you get that Nissa in play and then you untap, then you slam the Song of Creation, all of a sudden, the world is your oyster basically with all that mana that you have.
Absolutely. So my inspiration for this list was actually something that I saw Martin Yuza and Matthias Leverato had been playing with the Temur shell, based on a lot of the same cards that I ultimately used, but they were not playing Nissa, which I thought might have been an oversight, because surely wouldn't you want to have double mana? I mean, who wouldn't want that?
Yeah, double lands per turn, double mana. This seems good.
Double mana, double lands, all the cards in the world. I mean, nothing makes Magic players more excited than being able to draw cards, and this card basically lets you draw your entire deck if you build around it.
Let me tell you, the first game that I got to untap with Anissa Who Shakes the World in play and a Song of Creation in play, it was like, okay, I can get used to this. This is nice. I think by the end of the turn, I put like 6 additional lands into play. It's really an amazing feeling. So what will happen is that's your win turn. If you've managed to maneuver the game into a position where you get to untap with Nissa and with Song, the first spell you play will draw 2 cards that will hopefully find more spells. At some point while you're doing this, you might find the second Song of Creation. And that's the point where you have to ask yourself the question, am I ready to commit to this? Because once you have 2 songs in play, you're now drawing 4 spells. You're now drawing 4 cards every time you play any spell, and your deck is only so large. So you have to sort of figure out, is this the turn when I'm going to win? Because if it's not, you're going to end up with a bunch of stuff in play, but nothing left in your hand, and potentially no way to actually deal them lethal damage anymore. Your only road to victory at that point might be something like the Fastest Oracle kill.
Oh my goodness. You have to be very, very careful, I guess, when you're tapping your lands, because you're like, okay, I need to set myself up because I'm drawing a lot here. So auto tapper, I'm not trusting you at all. And we're going to try and make sure we leave up 2 blue here.
Yeah.
You're very wise.
Could you talk to us a little bit about Merfolk's Secret Keeper and Radical Idea and Maximize Velocity in your list?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the tricky part of the deck. If we're kicking off a show called Rogue Refinery, and I'm here all excited about a deck playing Arboreal Grazer and Nissa and Uro and telling you I broke the format wide open, I think they'd shut the show down.
Right.
These have been dominating.
We did it, folks.
We broke standard.
So where does the rubber meet the road? Where does this Song Creation deck actually take shape? Well, it goes back to that drawback exactly like you were saying. You have to accept that you might not win the game the same turn you cast Song Creation. So you have to be prepared for that end of turn to roll around and you discard your hand, and then you have to win the next turn when you get to untap. So what you need is some guarantee that you'll actually have a spell waiting for you. If the card you draw that turn is a land, you might have nothing to start the chain. So what you want to do is stash a spell somewhere else, not in your hand, where it's safe from the discard trigger. You can do that in a bunch of different ways in Standard. You can do that with escape cards out of the graveyard. The Adventure Zone is a wonderful place to have a spell waiting for you. You can even have a companion. Or you can even maybe stash a spell functionally on the battlefield, on a permanent that lets you draw an extra card. So I had a couple tricky little cards like this that you could think of them as the synergy components of the deck. So a Merfolk Secret Keeper was probably by far the best of them. It's just so efficient. 1 mana to put it into the Adventure Zone. And while you're doing that, you're milling 4 cards deeper to look for your Uros and to just get you closer to your Thassa's Oracle kill. Cards like Radical Idea, Maximize Velocity, I tried Ox of Agonis in one of my iterations. These are so-so. I mean, there are other ways of trying to play in the same space. Really, it's Secret Keeper and Uro, the escape clause on Uro, that are going to be your bread and butter there in terms of restarting the chain, the turn that you began with the song in play and have nothing in your hand.
So Dan, you took this deck for a spin on Arena, and I want to know, how did it work? How did it fare against some of the more nasty decks in Standard, like Bant Ramp and Yorion Fires and all that other nonsense?
Yeah, so I took this into the Standard event on Arena, and the first 2 decks right off the bat were a Jeskai Cycling deck, the kind of the Flourishing Fox deck that has become quite popular lately, and a cool Temur Mutate deck based on Illuna Apex of Wishes that was trying to mutate and get a bunch of permanents into play. Very cool deck. Both of these decks, in their own way, were trying to execute a snowballing plan. what I discovered very quickly was that my snowballing plan was much, much bigger than theirs. I just steamrolled these two decks. I hope they had fun, but at a certain point, I was like, man, I've been just casting spells for 3 minutes straight, and they're just watching me. You lose track pretty quickly of what turn it is because you're making so many land drops in a given turn. You don't know how many land drops you have left. You look down, they have 4 lands, 5 lands in play, and you have 12, and it's like, oh yeah, this is turn 5. So it felt great, and I discovered very quickly 2 things. One is that Song of Creation, when it's going off, is as powerful as pretty much anything you can do in Standard. It might be one of the most powerful things you can do in Standard. Second, I also discovered, or was reminded at least, that the baseline core of Grazer into Growth Spiral into Nissa on turn 3 is just going to win a lot of games.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, that's no surprise to you guys.
Yeah, I mean, but that's the thing with this deck, by the way, is you have the Ramp Shell. This has been proven to be one of the strongest things you can do in Standard for a long time now, right? You have the backup plan of going Nissa into Creature, into Uro. So, even if you don't have Song of Creation, you can still just ramp and play kind of that fair game. But you have that other plan, right? That plan of sticking Song of Creation after you drop Nissa and just completely blow the game wide open.
Oh, yeah. So you got off to a really, really good start, but then what happened in round 3? You ran into Bant, didn't you? What happened there?
Yes, round 3. So exactly, I started off 2-0, and I was like, this deck is working perfectly. I'm coming for that 7 wins. This is going to be great. In round 3, I found myself paired against a Bant Yorion control deck. These are the new 80-card decks that are hoping to play a longer game with a lot of permanents that generate value when they enter the battlefield. Things like Omen of the Sea. They have Fire's Invention as well. So they're steadily accumulating value throughout the game, but they also play a lot of cards that can interact and disrupt what the opponent is doing. So think of cards like Counter Magic or Shatter the Sky to wipe away all my board. So I wasn't expecting to run the tables by any stretch. What happened in round 3? Well, on the 3rd turn of the game, they played a land and they started tapping their mana. Down came Narset, Parter of Veils from War of the Spark.
Ooh.
Yeah,
that's
hurt.
A rough one.
I don't know who's responsible for this card, Paul.
Paul could
you
tormented.
can blame me for pretty much everything. That's what all my friends do anyways. So it's totally fine. Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, even people inside the building sometimes you're like, "Hey, Paul, what happened?" I'm like,
Poor Paul.
There's some good ones, and sometimes some cards are a little more powerful than others, right? And that's just one of those cards.
It is nigh impossible to beat. It stops you from drawing more than 1 card a turn. So not only does your song now just read discard your hand, but
ooh, that's not a good card. That is not a good Magic card.
No.
You can't even cycle your Uros to dig towards an answer because you can't. That's just also shut down. So you're basically stuck. And unfortunately, Narset plays so well with these Urion and Blink control strategies that you're seeing a lot of it in main decks everywhere. So it was a test, and I learned some important lessons. The main takeaway I had was that you just can't beat Narset. I don't have a solution for that. Do you have any ideas on this? There are so few ways for me to remove a Planeswalker from the battlefield the way that I have constructed the deck that I was just at my wit's end, just hoping they wouldn't draw it in their 80 cards.
Yeah, I mean, sure, 80 cards is totally fine. They still find exactly what they need when they need it, but yeah, for cards like Narset, like Brazen Borrower, Petty Theft, it's another adventure card you can tuck into the little adventure zone like you mentioned. That's the first thing that came to mind.
I'm also thinking of sideboard options, right? I think Fry, for example, is a pretty strong sideboard option because you're in the Temur colors. It kills the Narset right away. Still, sure, they get their value, but at least you get it off the battlefield. But Brazen Borrower is also a thing, right? Because you really just need that 1 turn to be able to get that off the battlefield and then just draw out the rest of your deck. So those are some options, but at the same time, you're still trying to keep your deck as linear as possible. So when you just run into Narset, sometimes you're just going to lose. But
sometimes you just scoop it up and move
look,
on.
That's the price you pay sometimes when you play a deck like this, right? Sometimes you just run into the card that's really good against what you're trying to do. Other times your opponents are cycling and doing nothing, and you just run them over. So
Narset won that game, but did you manage to get one of your own back, or did she just run you over again?
I came prepared, as I thought, to fight this kind of battle. I had my own Aether Gusts, I had my Mystical Disputes, I had a Fry in the sideboard, those Shrine Bonecrusher Giants. So I was able to battle back and take the second game. Nissa and Song of Creation, when they're doing their thing, they're very powerful. Game 3 was where I had a little bit of a heartbreak because I had maneuvered the game where it seemed like I was about to pull ahead. I was able to get my Nissa down. I was able to even land Song Creation and start drawing cards. But then I reached that decision point that I referred to way back in the beginning, where you draw the second Song Creation, and now it's like, what do you do here? Obviously, the point of playing a Song Creation deck is to play the second song and complete the combo turn. You're not going to get another chance at it because you're going to discard all the cards you're holding. So I figured I have enough mana, I'm just going to go for it. So I played my second song, and I was on track to draw my entire deck, which I did. I found my Faithless Oracle, cast it. It was going to draw my last cards in the deck. Down came Neutralize. They countered the Faithless Oracle. And I had nothing left. I had cleanly drawn my entire library. I'd done everything except win. And
Oh no.
Yeah, so it sounds like there probably needs to be some kind of plan against counter magic, because if your opponents have one counter spell for your Thassa's Oracle and you can't beat it, then we might need something there.
Yeah, it's a big problem.
Hard.
It's a big problem, and Song gets you in these situations where you actually can no longer even deal lethal damage to them before you run out of cards in your deck. Even if I stopped casting spells and just focus on attacking, which is a very suspect strategy to begin with against a control deck, I wouldn't have been able to kill them in time. So it was basically Faithless Oracle or bust. What I discovered in this match and in subsequent matches against similar control decks was that the discard clause on Song makes it quite awkward to turn to some of these natural counterplay options out of the sideboard. There are a lot of cards that are specialized removal that you might want to have to remove a problematic permanent like a Fire's Invention. Think of cards like Wilt or something like that, or a counterspell like Missile Dispute can be very important in blue mirrors. Well, it turns out that you just can't hold those cards in your hand anymore. You really need cards that you can play on your turn proactively, because once the song is down, you're playing basically hands down. You have nothing left. You have no counterplay on their turn. You cannot stop them from landing whatever they want to land on their turn, and that applies to control decks or even to opposing combo decks. I had some trouble with cards like Winota Joy, different match, and sometimes my plan was better, sometimes their plan was better, and they were getting Luca, Coppercoat Outcast, and finding Agent of Treacheries and stealing all my stuff. So I found that the overall strategy, while powerful, was also quite narrow. It only had a pretty constricted range of effects that it had access to, and it was specifically because Song forces you down a pretty straight and narrow path, playing sort of head first, we could say.
I mean, it does sound like one of those decks where if a lot of people are just playing, extremely linear strategies, then you can bring this deck. If your metagame is filled with a bunch of control players with a bunch of counter spells, maybe we can consider something else. But I mean, it still seemed like a super exciting deck. And I mean, you were saying it yourself, Song of Creation, I mean, might just be one of the most powerful cards in Standard.
Yeah.
So while you were playing this deck, like, what were some of the more difficult instances or lessons that you learned while you were piloting it?
What were the hard lessons from the deck? It's hard to choose just one, to be honest. This was a learning experience, I'll say that much. Even with the aid of the smoothness of the arena client, it's just a lot to keep track of. Yeah. How many land drops have I made? What's happening on any given turn? There's just so many triggers going on the stack. Sometimes you forget very basic things. So we were just talking about how it's actually pretty tricky to save your removal spells for the situations where you need them. And maybe I knew that at some level, but there was a game against a mono red deck where I had thought of the perfect line to make sure that I was going to survive through the next turn. The opponent had an Embercleave in play, and I wanted to just make sure that it wasn't on the wrong creatures. I was definitely going to survive. So I had my Bonecrusher Giant in hand, went past the turn, and I was ready to go their combat step and respond to the equip. Went to my end of turn, there goes the Song of Creation trigger onto the stack, and there goes my Bonecrusher Giant into my graveyard. I found a brilliant line. Yeah, so I'm going to make these mistakes so that you all out there watching this don't have to make them. Lots of things like that. I could name several examples, but basically, yeah, there are some things that you'll find that you actually just can't defend against. Yeah. So a lot of lessons learned in the School of Hard Knocks, but also a lot of big wins. It's a rush.
Tell us about the biggest win that you had with this deck. Like, what was the highlight for you?
I mean, it's hard to pick just one, but I'm sure if we can show some gameplay that there's just turns where I'm just taking all the actions. I began the turn with It seems like nothing in play, but I have a Nissa and I have 6 lands. By the end of the turn, I've drawn my entire deck. I have 2 songs. I have
Nice.
12 to 14 lands, and you can do this even when you have seemingly nothing. So even against some of the control decks where I was able to come out on where I was able to come out on top in these interactive back and forth games, a single song can just claw you back so quickly. And that was something that I wasn't sure if it would be able to do something like that, if it was going to be just a win more card, or if it was able to single-handedly sort of carry a full game. And I'm happy to say that it was able to do that when it stays in play.
So was this Nissa deck like the be-all and end-all, or is there anything else that you tried before you put this Song of Creation deck down?
I did try a few different things. Like I said, the Nissa blue-green ramp is a little bit boring. Maybe it's a little safe. I wanted to try to mix it up a little bit, so I did try one other deck that I'll tell you about briefly. It didn't work, but it failed spectacularly. This was based on the concept, well, what if instead of trying to make mana to cast my spells, what if I just picked the spells that were the cheapest I could possibly find? What if I play spells that cost 0 mana? Then as soon as I land my Song of Creation, I can just start playing 0 mana spells. Each one is like a free divination almost.
Yeah.
It doesn't do anything, but it draws me 2 new cards. It turns out that in Standard, there are a bunch of cards like this that you can play. Stonecoiled Serpent, Chamber Sentry, and Ugin's Conjurant are all creatures that cost X. You can set X to 0. They'll just die. That's fine. There's also an adventure creature called Rosethorn Acolyte. When you send it on the Seasonal Ritual Adventure, it basically is like a mini Manamorphose. It replaces itself. So 16 cards that let you go mana neutral means that you can kill them as soon as even turn 4. I got a turn 4 kill my very first try with this. We'll call it a Cheerios deck. I mean, that's a strategy more seen in Modern and Pioneer, where you're playing cards that cost 0, that have a 0 up in there. Where the mana cost is. This is more like a Cheery X kind of deck, because they all cost X. There's no actual zeros in there. Cheery X, that doesn't have a great ring to it. But yeah, so this is like the standard Cheerios, and it worked about like you'd expect. You get a couple of spectacular wins, and then a few losses where your deck doesn't do anything. Song of Creation is the only card that makes this strategy remotely viable, and that's a very unique effect. When you don't have it, or when they remove it, your deck is basically doing nothing. You can hard cast your Stonecoiled Serpents, but they're just too weak on their front half. You can't win actual competitive matches of Standard this way. So my takeaway from that was the concept might work if the free spells were a little bit stronger on their own, if they were not cards that you feel kind of bad putting them into your Magic deck. But in Standard, it seemed like the tools were not quite there for that route. So I was much more comfortable with the blue-green ramp as one that I think you'll have a much better time with if you want to take that one.
You couldn't win a match going 2 mana 2/2, 3 mana 3/3, 4 mana 4/4. That's not a winning recipe in Standard.
You're thinking too. I was playing 5/5s. I had 2 5/5 Stonecoiled Serpents. I mean, what could they even do?
Some 5 mana 5/5s, get them. Just good old honest magic. Yeah.
Yeah, so that was they became my opponent's 5/5s after they grabbed some Agent of Treacheries and linked them with your rounds.
Hey, you know what? But at least you tried, right? Because I think that is definitely one of the strategies that a lot of other people probably look to as well, right? What can I do if I play this enchantment and fill my deck up with a bunch of just 0 mana cards? Well, turns out half your games, you're just going to draw a bunch of 0 mana cards and your deck's not going to do anything, right? And then you just have to kind of sit there and just be like, man, if I draw that song, you're totally maybe going down if you don't have something, right? So that's kind of what I imagine happened. But it does seem like the games where you do go off, I mean, you really go off.
Oh yeah. It'll be like flashbacks of Nexus of Fate. You'll take a 6-minute turn, and by the end of it, you'll have drawn the entire deck, and it's turn 4, turn 5, or something. So, cool to do it once. I was able to get the game recorded, so it happened, and I'm satisfied with that. I would not recommend trying this at home.
Well, you heard it from Dan, friends. Don't try this at home, but maybe do, because it's fun. Thank you very much, Dan, for showing us exactly what Song of Creation can do in Standard. So, Paul, let's take a look at some of the lessons that we've learned here from Dan today.
Yeah, so taking a look at this first point here, managing the end of turn discard trigger is challenging when it comes to finding your conditions and moving cards between zones. That's big. You cannot play this deck at instant speed.
No.
if you have a Song of Creation in play. Because if you do, if you pass, if you come up with all these grand plans of trying to interact with your opponent, well, guess what? That end of turn trigger is going to happen, and you're not going to have any spells to play. So just always remember there is no saving any spells when you have Song of Creation in play.
Yes, don't get too attached to your hand because Song of Creation is going to discard it. Rather try and cheat cards back into play either via the Adventure Zone or Escape or with Jumpstart. Please don't keep Thassa's Oracle in your hand and pass the turn because boop, there goes win condition, and that will make you a very, very sad panda indeed.
So for the second point, Song of Creation actually works well as a big mana engine card. It's very similar to kind of Hydroid Krasis in previous iterations of Ramp, where before you go ramp, Nissa into Hydroid Krasis, now you go ramp, Nissa into Song of Creation. So that's really important. If you do have something like a Nissa in your hand that can generate you tons of mana, play the Nissa first. That's your win condition. Play the Nissa first, then follow that up with Song of Creation so that you have enough mana to actually draw your entire deck.
Yeah, and like you guys mentioned too, it's important for a deck like this to have a backup win condition. We know how powerful Nissa is. She shakes the world and she shakes the standard format. So yeah, if you don't have Song of Creation, that's a good backup plan. But with Nissa down, Song of Creation is just that much better.
Yeah, it really feels like that's the thing that you want to be doing with Song of Creation in standard specifically. So on to the next point. And this is for anybody who's maybe looking to tweak and tune this deck. Just know that the more you bend your deck to make the combo more reliable, the kind of worse your fair plan becomes, right? The more ramp spells you take away from your strategy, or the more adventure cards that you add into your deck, all of a sudden, your deck just starts feeling less powerful because you're taking away a lot of those ramp elements. So just remember, when you're tuning this deck, at its core, it is kind of a ramp strategy. It just has a different win condition than what we've seen in the past.
And lastly, interaction is still a problem. Hand disruption, counter spells, they are all going to just absolutely wreck this game's plan, unfortunately.
Yeah, as Dan alluded to, this deck is really good when your opponents just don't interact with you at all, right? When they don't disrupt your game plan, kill your mana creatures or counter your spells, you're fine. But the moment you run into a Narset, the moment you run into a Brazen Bar or Bouncing Song of Creation, or a removal spell to kill your Nissa, all of a sudden, your house of cards just kind of crumbles. So just remember that if you are playing in a field where there's a lot of control decks, this type of deck might struggle. But remember, if your opponents are also trying to do some really fun, sweet things in Standard, well, then this might actually be a pretty good deck to try out.
So let's shift into Pioneer now. Paul, how do you think that Song of Creation is going to fare in this format?
Well, I think you're just going to get a lot more tools. I think this is definitely, whenever you look at a card and it kind of looks like it belongs in some kind of a combo deck, well, the more toys you have access to, the better that combo will be. So Pioneer all of a sudden has unlocked a much larger card pool for this deck to function. So there's a lot more directions you can go with this card. And, actually, I'm just really curious as to see, where we're going to go with this deck, because again, there's so many different things. Dan alluded to the fact that you can put a bunch of really cheap artifacts into your deck. He didn't really have anything to do with it, and he also felt like those 0 mana cards didn't do anything in his deck. Mm-hmm. Well, that might be different in a format like Pioneer, where your mana rocks or your mana artifacts might actually be useful cards to play in a deck.
To show us just what Song of Creation can do in Pioneer, we've got David Robertson, also from the Faithless Brewing podcast. Welcome, David.
Hi, thanks for having me. So yeah, as you guys had alluded to, the kind of depth of free options in Pioneer is much deeper. You're not just playing cards that go immediately to the graveyard. In fact, there's quite a few options that are actually going up mana. So one of the key cards in the deck is Mox Amber. The card is both free, so it triggers your Song of Ascension. It also taps for mana. So if you cast all 4 Mox Ambers over the course of your Song of Creation turn, you're actually adding 4 extra mana plus the extra land drop. That gives you enough bandwidth to play a few other cards. And so this deck, sort of like Dan's Cheerios deck or Cheerix deck, is trying to play Song of Creation and then win that turn. It has possibilities to win the following turn, and then one of the key cards in this deck is Emery, Lurker of the Loch. This card both plays free cards from your graveyard with Song of Creation in play, causing it to trigger again. It also it comes down for very cheap, so it's actually only 1 mana often on your Song of Creation turn. It mills you even more, so you need less cards to kind of get to the point where Thassa's Oracle wins the game. And it turns on your Mox Amber. It's a legend. So the synergies there are quite extensive.
So I've seen, kind of you using Song of Creation along with a bunch of these cheap spells to generate mana in your deck. But there's also really additional interesting card that you have in your deck that also looks to be extremely powerful. Really powerful enchantment, at least back in the day, might still be so now. Jeskai Ascendancy. Could you tell us a little bit about why there are 4 copies of Jeskai Ascendancy in this deck?
Yeah, so a lot of times when we build a combo deck, we want to make sure we have additional pieces. So like Dan was describing in his standard version, in your Song of Creation deck, sometimes you don't draw Song of Creation. When you have extra replicates, it really increases the consistency of your deck. If you think of Dimir Inverter, for instance, in Pioneer, the card that took it to the next level was Thassa's Oracle. That has a similar effect to Jace, Wielder of Mystery. So now you have 8 effects that can end the game if you don't have a library. Jeskai Ascendancy has a powerful interaction with Emry, where if Emry is casting a 0-drop out of your graveyard with a Jeskai Ascendancy in play, all your creatures in play become infinitely large because of the Jeskai Ascendancy untap trigger. And if you're looping Mox Amber, so 1 Mox Amber comes into play through the legend rule, it puts the other one in the graveyard, you actually generate infinite mana as well. So even if they have as many blockers as you have attackers, you can loot through your deck until you find a Walking Ballista and use your infinite mana to kill your opponent.
I will say, I actually got to mess around with this deck a little bit. It is really hard to do this online to make enough mana to kill your people with Walking Ballista, but it is super powerful because, like you said, there are so many different ways to get infinite everything, right? You can mill your graveyard, you can loot basically through your entire deck, you can generate infinite mana, and like you said, I mean, Jeskai Ascendancy plus Emry plus either Tormod's Crypt or Mox Amber, 2 Mox Ambers, is basically all you need to just kill your opponent.
Yeah, and it gives you kind of different ways to interact. One of the things that happens in Pioneer is there's lots of cards that prevent you from winning. So for instance, Gideon of the Trials is a card that doesn't let you win through the Thassa's Oracle. People are already playing that because of Inverter. So you need to have this backup plan that either kills the Gideon, like you're saying with extra mana from Walking Ballista, or you just make all your creatures infinitely large and one of them hits Gideon and one of them hits your opponent. So it kind of gives you a few outs. You're still weak to some of the same cards. Narset is also a problem, although you can choose not to draw with your Ascendancy. If you get that loop going, you can just make your creatures infinitely large and choose not to loot. So you can still win through a Narset, which is better than not being able to win through a Narset.
Yeah, yep, always.
Yeah, I mean, that's a nice backup plan. And also I see 2 copies of Paradoxical Outcome. Is that just to have a little extra gas in your deck? Is that what you're trying to, just to have a little more action spells, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, just a payoff to having all these zeros. The deck has a lot of air. When we use the term air, what we mean is cards that don't do anything. If you draw a hand that's a bunch of Mox Ambers and Tormod's Crypts and 4 lands, your opponent's probably playing creatures or planeswalkers, things that actually affect the board. And you need to start drawing those cards. A common play pattern is a Paradoxical Outcome on their end of turn. You fill your hand back up with all these zeros that you want to play out to play your Emrys for cheap, etc. Now they're all in your hand. So if you resolve a Song of Creation on your next turn, all of a sudden you have a bunch of triggers. Yeah, so now you kind of reset your Tormod's Crypt. So Song of Creation
exciting.
is plenty of fuel, plenty of gas in the tank.
Yeah, no, that sounds really, really exciting because setting up Paradoxical Outcome into basically the kill with Song of Creation, that seems like a wombo combo right there.
Yeah, and one kind of cool new card that is also worth noting in this deck is Kinnan Bonder Prodigy. You're playing 4 Springleaf Drum and 4 Mox Amber, so Kinnan both lets you play Song of Creation early. It also, during your combo turn, it makes it way less hard. I'm not a Natural Storm player, and there's so many choices you have to make in terms of card order if you're going to be able to go off or not. And Kinnan actually makes it quite easy. All these interactions go up mana. So you play your Springleaf Drum, tap a creature. Kinnan actually triggers, so you get 2 mana out of that. When you play your Mox Amber, you get 2 mana out of that too. So the extra mana makes your decisions a lot easier instead of having to kind of walk that razor's edge for many turns. I struggle with the clock. I know you and I were talking, Paul. If your opponent makes you execute the combo in full, which they always do, there's many of these tiny little decision points, and I'm really, really thin on win conditions. There's only 1 Underworld Breach and 1 Thassa's Oracle, so you have to be very meticulous about your ordering, or you're going to have a bad time after you spend a lot of time trying to make it work.
All right, well, David, you took us through a league on Magic Online. How did it go?
You know, it went pretty well. The deck's trying to kind of prey on the fact that black-white auras with Luris is very popular. It may be the best deck in the format. We're not sure. But what that's encouraged other people to do is play other like linear strategies, and so they're less likely to be able to interact with your cheap creatures. So in the first match, I played blue-green ramp. They don't have an easy way to kill Emery or Kinnan. And so I was able to go off very quickly. I think on turn 4, I had a... Emery kill. Of course, they made me execute the whole loop. So it took, 5 or 6 minutes. We'll hopefully fast forward through all that. You guys don't have to watch me click through. And then, game 2, they brought in a little more disruption. They brought in Thought Not Seers. They had me all the way to 1. And then I ripped my Jeskai Ascendancy and with an active Emery in play. And you just get to watch me tap and untap a bunch of times. So
nice.
So if you're playing against a deck that does not have an easy way to kill Emery, you just have this kind of oops, I win button you can always draw to. And even if you draw Song of Creation, it's not a deterministic kill, but having an Emery that just immediately finds a 0-drop out of your graveyard just starts the chain. So you do have a reasonable chance to win kind of out of nowhere as long as Emery's around. There's hope.
Yeah, no, Song of Creation, I mean, just gives you that extra way to kind of reset, right? Because when I was playing this deck, it really felt like Jeskai Ascendancy was a super powerful thing to be doing in this deck. That kind of led to a lot of the kills. But at the same time, all of a sudden, now you have an extra angle of attack with this Song of Creation, where now you won't just fizzle out, right? You have this extra enchantment where all of a sudden, out of nowhere, you slam this card. You chain together a couple of artifacts, or even if you're empty-handed, if you have that Emery in play, boom, you can just win the game out of nowhere. And maybe that's the reason why our opponents, as frustrated as they are making us click through the entire combo, right? Because they're like, I had this. What happened?
Yeah, so speaking of the power of Song of Creation, in match 2, game 1, on my 4th turn, I have a Kinnan in play, and I play my Song of Creation. And you just get there. You start playing these 0-drops. If you have Mox Ambers active, you end up going up a bunch of mana. You get to play your Emerys just for 1 mana. And you end up with, I think I ended the turn with, the main thing you're trying to do is just make sure you have exactly enough blue pips when you resolve your Thassa's Oracle so that you don't deck. The card, especially when you have Kinnan, it's just so easy to win, even if you have very little material in your hand. You end up drawing so many cards, and the deck has basically 20 0-drops and then another like 8 or 9 1-drops. So it almost becomes deterministic at a certain point. Once you draw a certain percentage of them, you're basically not ever going to whiff. And if you have an Ascendancy in play and then the Song, you can get that extra loot after you draw your 2. So you're just constantly drawing to your next 0. So it becomes not fully deterministic. They should actually probably make you click it out. Because in game 3, I boarded out my Underworld Breach, and I had to play my Thassa's Oracle to hit a land drop on turn 4. So I'm starting to go off, and I'm drawing and drawing and drawing, and I'm like, man, I better hit that Breach soon. If it's in your bottom 4 cards and your Thassa's Oracle's in the graveyard, you can't win with an active Song. The Song trigger is not a May. So as I'm drawing, I open up my sideboard, see that it's there, and it's just like, oh no. Man, I did it to myself. I could have won this match. I let this deck down. I'm trying to showcase the power of Song and a poor sideboarding decision. So yeah, I went out on my own terms. I paradoxical outcome for 20, and just I had all the chances in the world to win, and I let myself down.
This deck kind of looks like it can kill really, really quickly. I mean, what's the quickest win you've gotten with this one?
I did get a turn 2 kill. You actually have
turn 2.
Yeah, turn 2. So you actually have 2 different avenues to that. You can play a Mox Amber, a land, and any other 0-drop on turn 1, and play at Emery. Emery will only cost 1 blue mana because you have 2 artifacts reducing it. And then on your next turn, you have Mox Amber making blue. If you play your second land and they make red and a white, you can cast Jeskai Ascendancy. And if Emery milled over either another Mox Amber or a Tormod's Crypt, you make your Emery infinitely large, and she attacks.
Wow.
So that's what I did, turn 2. That was the one person who threw down, I think, because it was actually going to go quickly with 2 creatures in play.
That is so gross. I love it.
And it actually hurt me. They had just had a breeding pool tapped. I did not know what they were on, so I misboarded against them. I thought they were maybe blue-green ramp again, but it was the Lotus breach deck. So I actually lost game 2 because I killed them so quickly I didn't even know what they were doing.
Yeah, I try to knock.
So.
Yeah, I mean, whenever I win like that, I try to kind of minimize how much I sideboard, because otherwise, like, you can really pay if you just guess incorrectly, right?
Yeah.
But, I mean, just do the same thing again, right? Easy.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. But that's a super interesting thing about this specific build that you went with, because you have multiple avenues of victory, right? You can Thassa's people out. That's kind of like the cool, fun way, because you get to actually kind of draw your entire deck and do all the fun things Song of Creation was meant to do. But at the same time, you also have kind of this really powerful card by itself in Jeskai Ascendancy that you can just use to combo people off as early as turn 2. Yeah, that's pretty wild. And I was proud of my turn 3, but you got to pull off a turn 2.
Yeah, doing it on the play is so sweet. Like, they didn't even get to play a spell. It's just like, man. I thought we were playing Magic. I'm not sure what I was doing there, but I was not playing Magic. I was just watching a guy tap an Emery a bunch of times.
Well, one of you were having fun.
Yes, exactly.
It was you were just monopolizing all of it.
Right, exactly. The collective fun of both of us was very fun.
Right.
All right, so David, talking about some of the good stuff about the deck, like, what were some of the pain points in building it? Is there anything you'd want to take out or replace, or tell us a little more about the negative aspect of the deck?
The deck it has a lot of cards that don't do anything. You can't interact easily with their creatures. Eidolon of the Great Rebel in game 1 is literally just game over. You just kind of have to extend the hand, like, that's too good. And so your mono red matchup is absolutely abysmal. Or I guess it's Boros Luris now. But if you're frustrated by the presence of Luris, you can take a lot of comfort in the fact that they do not need to resolve Luris at all to beat you. They'll just beat you the old-fashioned way. All of their cards kill your 2 toughness creatures. So Kinnan and Emery just naturally die. So you don't get any of your extra mana. You don't get to tap your Mox Ambers for mana, and then their clock is very fast. So it's basically like a zero outer. I don't think you could even invest any sideboard cards to fix that matchup.
Yeah, that matchup seems horrible. Like, literally, it feels like almost every single card in their deck is just good against yours, right?
Yes.
They put on a fast clock, they have removal, and they have the Haymaker and Eidolon, which is just nearly impossible to remove unless you, I guess, turn 4 Walking Ballista for 2 or something to get it off the battlefield or something.
Yeah, you're just hoping for, like, the moral victory. You win game 2 on the play just for the false hope, and then game 3 it's like, all right, that was
all right. They have cards that do things, and I'm probably
it's not a Disney movie. You're not going to win this one. That's okay.
Just combo off on turn 2 all the time. It's
exactly.
easy. So, David, what was the coolest moment with this deck?
So I had the classic Robertson 3-0. I lost my first game on a just sheer punt. No one else would ever lose that game in a million years. I tapped a land that did a damage to me. So then it's like, all right, let's tighten up. Let's win, game 2 and 3 here. Win game 2, come off easily. Game 3, I'm at 14. They're playing like an Abzan Rally the Ancestors list. So with the cards in play and the sack outlet, they have exactly 13 damage on me. I have to win this turn. I have like 4 minutes on my clock. And I have 2 Ornithopters in play, and I'm just like frantically clicking. They're making me do it. They're at like 24, and then with all these life triggers, I'm not even doing the math, so I'm not even sure like how much life I need to do to them. So I'm just like, I'm just going to do this until like 14 seconds, and then I'm going to go to the combat step. So they're like, playing time tricks. They're trying to, and it's so frustrating because of course I should have won the first 2 games. This match should already be over. I get to my attack step despite all their time delays. I attack. They block, they do all these things to try to make me keep responding. At exactly 1 second, I do lethal damage to them at 1 life. Oh, it just felt so good. I would have just been so mad.
That feels so good.
Yeah.
That is the best. That is the best.
Yeah.
In before the nick of time. And speaking of time, that is all the time we have for today with David. Thank you very much for joining us and showing us exactly what Song Creation can do in Pioneer.
Thank you.
Alright, so Paul, now that we've seen this deck in action in Pioneer, what lessons have we learned?
Well, Pioneer, with the much larger card pool, means that you have access to better 0-drops. Not only that, there are just more pieces to actually make a functional combo deck work, which is what we saw. David actually had success with this deck because, he was able to kill people as early as turn 2. That is just not something that you can do in standard. So, having these 0-drops, having access to the Mox Ambers, the Tormod's Crypts, along with something just as powerful in Jeskai Ascendancy, put this deck kind of over the top to make it a far more competitive deck, I feel.
Yeah, I figured out the Emery Jeskai Ascendancy combo all on my own, so I was very proud about that. And I was just like, oh, hey, wait a minute. I can just keep looping this from the graveyard. And Emery just gets enormous. So Jeskai Ascendancy is super duper fun. And just having those zero-costed artifacts that you can just keep replaying and just keep going over and over. And if you have Song of Creation down, just being able to, like, you know, stick a cherry on top with that little loop that you got going. It's awesome. So, yeah, definitely a lot more tools to play with there.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun to learn how to play. And for anybody looking to actually play this deck, I recommend playing this at home and testing it by yourself a little bit, because there's a lot of intricacies to the deck that you're going to need to practice and learn, because it's not like you're playing a normal game of Magic. You're not just playing a 2-mana creature into 3-mana creature. It plays in a completely different axis. So just make sure you get the reps in. And another thing that we've learned from basically having access to the larger card pool is we get a little more redundancy. We actually have mana sources. And that's a really important thing. Being able to tap out and play the song and then follow that up with Mox Ambers and also even Springleaf Drum as potentially additional mana sources is huge. When you have Kinnan in conjunction with Springleaf Drum, you're actually netting 1 mana. So you're now, not only do you have access to the Ambers, you have the Springleaf Drums, and that's huge because, again, the biggest puzzle that you needed to solve when you build around this card was, how do I play more spells after I tap out on turn 4 to play this thing, right? Well, you need 0-mana artifacts. And if your 0-mana artifacts tap for mana, that's the key, that's the solution. And I think David did a really good job trying to figure out that puzzle.
All right, well, that's 2 formats down, 1 more to go. Let's see how Song of Creation does in Modern. Our final Rogue Refiner is the 3rd member of the Faithless Brewing podcast, and it is Damon Alexander. Welcome, Damon. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going well. I'm keen to see what shenanigans you have for us in Modern.
Yeah, so I first started off trying out a couple iterations of a kind of glass cannon combo shell that was similar to the deck Dave played in Pioneer. And I had a lot of trouble at the start where I would look at like the Grave Shot line to victory and my deck had 30 cards and they were 20 life. And I was like, this just doesn't work out. I'm going to deck out before I can kill them. So I took a list from a Reddit post from Aaron Gomu, who had a Kinnan combo deck featuring 4 Glittering Wish to give you the ability to find both Kinnan and Song of Creation out of your sideboard. I was like, I don't trust these flimsy Noxious Revival Grape Shot lines. I'm going to put a Jace Wheeler of Mysteries in the deck, inadvertently turned off Giganta as a companion, and went straight into a league with that.
So you had a Giganta in your sideboard.
Exactly, yeah. A couple of matches I decided out Jace because I was like, oh, I was going to die to fast aggro, and then kaboom, Giganta shows up.
The old plan B of having a companion 5-mana 5/5. I mean, it's hard to bolt a 5/5. Just saying.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Happy accidents.
Yeah.
So right. Taking a look at this kind of Song of Creation combo deck for Modern, I mean, we talked about how, yeah, the card pool gets wider when you go to Pioneer, right? There's more 0-drops. But you took it to another level with this list. I mean, taking a look here, we have 27 artifacts in your deck. I mean, you basically just committed all of your chips and you put it in one bucket, and you're kind of just all about getting this one enchantment in play.
That is correct. And what you're very generously not saying is why that might be a bad idea.
Hey, I'm just saying what you did. You tell us why it didn't work, maybe.
Yeah, well, okay, so some of the deck worked beautifully. Kinnan basically turns your Mox Ambers into a 0-mana, draw 2 cards, gain 2 mana, which is just straight up a broken Magic card where it printed straight up like that. And then you play a couple repeals, which is 1 blue mana, draw 3 cards, and targeting a Mox Amber will again net you mana. Playing these Chromatic Sphere, Chromatic Star cards, these are the real upgrades in Modern. Instead of having adventure creatures to let you kind of cash a card away for the next turn after discarding your hand, you can play these cards and cycle them in the early game if you just need to find your key cards to win. Kinnan partners beautifully with them because Kinnan turns your Chromatic Sphere and Stars into neutral on mana on the combo turn, and so this lets you, with Kinnan and Song out, almost deterministically loop through your whole deck, find your Jace Wheeler of Mysteries, play it, and finish drawing the rest of your deck and win. Unlike I was too nervous for Thassa's Oracle. I couldn't understand this. Like, well, you have to have exactly 2 cards in your deck as you play it, but then if they interact, you can't counter-interact. It just seemed too finicky for me. Jace was my guy for this. I think I peaked at discarding 11 cards to hand size with this list, and I won the next turn.
Nice.
Wow. That is yeah. I mean, just kind of looking at this deck. I mean, again, you have the 3 copies of Song of Creation along with the 4 copies of Glittering Wish to get it. So effectively, you have 7 copies of it. Additionally, you basically get to kind of cycle through your entire deck with cards like Chromatic Sphere, Chromatic Star, and Arkham's Astrolabe, right? And all those cards also work really, really well with that Kinnan that you have. So, I mean, it seems like there's a good amount of consistency built into this deck with lots of cycling, lots of cheap artifacts to go at that Song of Creation with the wishes. Why exactly did this deck not kind of play out the way that you wanted it to?
Yeah, so for one, if you go turn 2 Glittering Wish, find your missing combo piece, turn 3 play Kinnan, turn 4 play Song. Even if you win that turn, like that's still not that fast of a Goldfish combo. One match I was up against Prowess, and they go turn 1 Monastery Swiftspear. Like, oh, I hope they're not in burn. Eidolon's are wrecking versus me. And then they go turn 2, like I think I bobble a Lava Dart. I'm like, aha, they're on Prowess, no problem. And then they kill me turn 3. So that was kind of rough. And then game 2, they're like, abrade your Pendead person. I was like, all right, my Kinnan in hand is safe from that abrade, and they stomp it. The second Kinnan stomp. Most decks in Modern are well prepared to answer a 2-mana 2/2.
Yeah, I think I mean the thing, once you move into Modern, we talked about how this thing gets really powered up going into Pioneer because you have a lot of extra cheap tools. But here you're competing with the heavy hitters, right? You now are going up against other linear strategies that are probably faster than you, right?
Yeah.
Because you're glittering wishing for a 4-mana enchantment. Guess what? There are decks. If they go uncontested, like that Prowess deck you're talking about, they can just kill you on turn 3.
Yeah, and then the hate against those strong decks also hurts this deck too, whether that be a Damning Sphere or simply any card that kills a 2-mana 2/2, or a Mystical Disputer. Basically, name a hate card in the sideboard that's probably relevant against this deck. Yeah, so after playing this deck, I finished 2-3 in my first league, and the Song of Creation highs were pretty high. It still was quite fun, but I wasn't ready to take another kind of combo shell into a league. It just felt a little too fragile. Dan had floated an idea involving like a Landstorm deck featuring Arboreal Grazer, and I was like, I don't know about this, but then I decided that to try it, and I basically copied an Amulet Titan deck, made it 80 cards to play Yorion, which gives you, this extra 20 slots to slide in or to fit in all this Song of Creation stuff. So you take a tuned tier 1 Modern deck from the forges of Modern over multiple years of competitive history, and then play Yorion to justify adding 20 of your additions to it. And we have a deck.
I feel a lot of people have been doing that with Yorion. They're like, you know what? Now that I have Yorion on my deck, I can add another angle. So I'm going to add a second combo to my deck and see what happens.
Yeah. And it's weird. So what I added was basically a bunch of Mishra Baubles and Chromatic Stars and Growth Spirals and Grazers and the Song of Creations, of course. And it resulted in this deck that was actually pretty fun to play and felt quite powerful. I couldn't tell if the power was just Amulet Titan, being like, you should have played me a 60, but I'm here to win even with 80 cards, or if the additions I made were actually worthwhile. That said, I don't really enjoy playing Amulet Titan. It's like a little bit too kind of just same primetime plan every game. But adding Song of Creations has made the deck so much fun.
Yeah, so I had a question with this. So this deck, I mean, the way that it played out, now, was it faster, or was more of it kind of the fact that maybe it was just a little more resilient to removal or hand disruption or anything like that?
Yeah, the Song of Creations kind of act like extra copies of Primeval Titan in terms of being these clear win conditions. They do totally different things, but they really work well together in the sense that they both let you ramp on mana. They both kind of let you go from a pretty good game state into just over the top game state for the next turn. By the time your primetime resolves and gets 2 lands, or you go off with Song, your opponent's going to be so far behind. And this deck just was able to really leverage the land drops. And so similar to the Kinnan combo deck, one thing with Song is you really want to have a way to go kind of infinite. And weird as it sounds, Arboreal Grazer plus Amulet of Vigor out means that you can play Grazer, draw 2, drop a bounce land, untap it, get 2 mana, and you're actually up a mana off the Grazer. If you have multiple amulets out, you go up actually a substantial amount of mana. Likewise, Dryad of the Elysian Grove, if you have multiple amulets out, also goes up mana if you have Song out. And so both these cards let you just wind up putting a pile of things into play in a way that it feels just really fun.
So what you're saying is Arboreal Grazer is the MVP, right?
Yeah. During the league, I was kind of dropping to G-Chat like, man, Mishra's Bauble is the best card in Modern right now. Whenever you see a Loras player with like draw their Bauble, you're like, oh man, this is so unfair. I mean, of course they play for that reason. I was playing Bauble in this deck, so I couldn't even really complain. But then Grazer did so much work. He was blocking Goblin Guides, Swift Spears, like took a Rift Bolt to the face.
Yeah.
At one point, I look at the Song and the Summoners pack in my hand and go, wait, Song packed for Grazer. Draw 2 cards.
Packed for
Grazer, draw 2
Grazer.
cards.
That's a play. That is a play. Of all the cards to pack for, don't think I've ever packed it for an Arboreal Grazer, but you know, hey, if it buys you that one turn you need to win, I guess you got to go for it. But yeah, respect the power of the Arboreal. I mean, that's the thing. You know, that was one of those cards in testing where, you know, we were like, what does it take to kind of maybe have this end up being a playable card? Because when I first looked at it, I admit, I didn't think it was going to see a lot of play, because I was just like, well, you're down a card and it's an 0/3. Well, what if we give it reach? Then like it can block like a lot of things, right? Like, you know, 1 mana 0/3 reach, like, you know, like, and you know, funnily enough, I mean, that actually is very impactful in a lot of different matchups.
Yeah, and it just ticks all the boxes for Song. It's like this cheap play that accrues value onto the board.
Yeah, no, and it really, this is a really, really cool approach that you took, I think, where, you know, the other versions that we've seen, you know, your initial version, David's version was all about trying to get those super cheap artifacts in play and generating mana this way. This really leverages that additional land drop that you get out of the Song of Creation, and you have a lot of redundancy built in too. With, you know, you have the Growth Spiral, the Grazer, and the what was the Dried of the Elysian Grove, right? So, I mean, your deck can just really just get a ton of lands in play. And, I mean, kind of playing similarly to Dan's list, where you're just ramping out, and then, you know, all of a sudden you just have all this mana to play with to basically draw your entire deck.
Yeah. Primeval Titan is kind of like the Nissa of Modern.
Yeah, it seems pretty good.
Primeval Titan came first. Nissa is the Primeval Titan of Standard, is what we should be saying.
Fair, yeah.
So, okay, so the first version of your deck didn't really play out the way that you wanted it to, or, you know, the format was too fast, there's too much disruption. How did this one end up playing out for you?
Yeah, I racked off 4 quick victories over Burn, Green-Red Obosh, Humans playing Loras, Hardened Scales playing Loras, and then I just got crushed by Devoted Druid combo. It killed me on turn 3, game 1, and turn 4, game 2, and I looked at all my like bounce lands and grazers, and I was like, these don't really quite stabilize here. I almost had like an EE to clear their board, but it just wasn't in time.
All right, so Damon, you had a really, really good run with this deck. Like, were there any other insights or takeaways that you had for this list for our viewers?
Yeah, I just want to say that I made a lot of mistakes through this league, whether it be mistapping lands to miss an opportunity to play Yorion with 2 Primeval Titans to flicker, or playing a Vesuva with Blood Moon out, and then realizing that when I kill the Blood Moon with my explosives, it's just a blank piece of cardboard. More mistakes, you know, triggers with field and bouncing can go wrong in all sorts of ways. But the deck just kind of carried me through all these mistakes, and it was just like, we're not going to let you lose, Damon.
Hashtag never punished.
Yeah, and that's a really good feeling with still kind of you know, prototype brew, is to feel like the deck just wants to earn these victories. That there might be something here, or maybe the 60 card Primeval Titan deck, you know, has already been optimized.
Yeah. Well, not only, I mean, I think this is also just like a prime example of, you know, we sit around and we look at a powerful card and we try to build a deck around it. And then you're like, okay, you know what? This is not going to work. Let's see if I can do something else. And that's what you did. You pivoted, right? You were like, this 27 artifact strategy is not going to work. Maybe I can find a different shell. And you did. You found that shell and you went 4-1 with the deck. So it's just proof that, like, if anybody watching is looking to build around a card or whatever, like, don't just give up the first time your deck doesn't work. Try to find, you know, either try to fine tune the thing that you have, or just completely look in a different direction, especially in a format like Modern, where there's so many different ways you can build a deck, right?
I had a quick question, Anna. We've seen what Yorion does in Standard. Like, what did it do in this list, specifically with Song of Creation?
Yeah, in my league, I mostly just played Yorion to flicker Astrolabes and Grazers, which was pretty good. There is actually a nice interaction though, where you can play Yorion, and it takes up maybe all your mana for the turn with Song out, which is normally a bad thing because you draw these 2 cards when you discard them. But you can flicker the Song itself, and so then by the time it comes back, it's missed the opportunity to make you discard your hand.
Oh.
And so you get to kind of escape that turn with a full grip.
Nice.
That's like the best Mold Drifter ever, right?
Yeah.
The 5 mana 4/5 ETB, draw 2 cards.
And don't get mind twisted.
Or no, probably more, right? Because you're bouncing other things.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Damon, for showing us what Song Creation can do in this Amulet Titan shell. I think you had some really, really great games, and I'm keen to give this a go myself. But now, Paul, we're going to take a look at what lessons we've learned from Song Creation in Modern.
So I think the first thing that we want to talk about here is, the fact that building this deck in a more combo-oriented fashion just does not work in Modern. And that's because there's just a lot more hate for these types of combo strategies, right? You have people that are playing a bunch of hand disruption. You have people that are playing, a bunch of cheap removal. You have people playing Stony Silence. You just have people playing all these cards that really attack your strategy, that having something that relies on just one card to win is just not the recipe for success. So that is not something that, it was successful in Pioneer, but didn't really quite work out in Modern.
I mean, you see so many different iterations of this deck, but like you say, there's just so many ways to kill you quickly, and I experienced quite a few of them in Modern. I was just like, oh, I'm dead all of a sudden. My opponent's comboing off or storming and doing all these things, and it's just like, I have no way to get out of that situation. So yeah, certainly struggled a little bit in Modern until it found its way into the Amulet Titan shell.
Yeah, and that's the next point that I want to talk about, is finding this and putting it into this Amulet shell with the Yorion. I mean, I think that was brilliant. I think that was really, really big, because part of the reason why the Amulet deck is so successful is it's kind of hard to hate out in a sense, because you need to have basically cards that are specifically very good against lands to kind of shut them off. Cards like Blood Moon or whatever. But other than that, I mean, not only do you have an extra card in your hand that you can play, right? But at the same time, you're just kind of playing this land strategy. You can't hand disruption lands away out of their hand. And there's a lot of redundancy here. Not only do you have the extra land ability that I don't think a lot of people even focus on that card, even though it's an extremely powerful effect. That extra land that you get to play off of Song of Creation means you get to keep the ball rolling. You get to play more spells. And in an Amulet shell, anytime you play a tap land, that's 2 lands, not 1. So you have that built into already a very powerful shell that people have been tuning and tweaking, and you just got to add 20 of some fun cards that have come out basically, and you're going to see a lot of that too, right? Because Yorion now basically allows people to kind of think outside the box and see what they can do if they can expand the deck to 80 cards. And I think this was a pretty seamless transition into turning that Amulet Titan deck into basically now an Amulet Titan Song of Creation deck, which ended up having a lot of success.
Yeah, and the one thing that I also liked about this build is that it didn't rely on, milling yourself out as quick as you can with Thassa's Oracle or with Jace. It's purely just, okay, I'm just going to be the icing on top of this already delicious cake in Amulet Titan. So, yeah, I like that take on it for sure.
Yeah, because when people look at this card, I think kind of like the first thing everybody thinks about, we like to call it the level 1, is, okay, I'm going to play this and a bunch of 0 mana cards, right?
Yep.
And then I'm not really sure what's going to happen after, but I'm going to draw a lot of cards, right?
Yeah.
And this, it's different, right? It's like, no, I'm going to ramp into this, hit a bunch of land drops, and still have extra, and basically take advantage of the fact that I have all this mana in play to just keep the ball rolling and just keep generating more and more card advantage.
Yeah, so I think the way to go with Song of Creation, or at least the way that Damon did, was, cool, I'm milling so many cards, let's just play more cards. So Yorion's Sky Nomad certainly fits that. So that's all she wrote for the very first episode of Rogue Refinery. Thank you so much for joining us all. Before we say adieu, Paul, what was your favorite deck of this week?
I think probably the best deck was probably the Modern deck that Damon submitted. But the deck that I had the most fun playing was the Jeskai Ascendancy Song of Creation combo deck in Pioneer.
Yeah, that was fun.
Because there were so many learning moments. That's a really, really difficult deck to play. But every time you won, it was so satisfying. It took a long time, but it was really, really satisfying for me because I didn't know about the deck going into it. So I had to kind of figure out the combos as I was playing the deck. And it was really, really fun trying to figure that out and slowly get better with the deck over time.
Alrighty, friends, that's going to do it from us. Thank you so much for watching. If there are any cards specifically that you think we should build around, let us know down in the comments below. Leave a like, subscribe, do all those things, and we'll see you again next time.